Okay, here we are. Welcome to the first full Lunar Alchemy session of 2022. Happy New Year to all of you. I'm so happy to be here with Bella. If you haven't met me before, I'm John, and this session of Lunar Alchemy, we're going to be talking about the shadow of greed and gene key 54. This is a really interesting one to me because of there's such a wide range in our experience between the shadow frequency and our perceptions about the city frequency. This particular gene key is about the ascension, the serpent path, the kundalini, all of these esoteric spiritual concepts are embodied within this gene key, and yet we have it arising out of the shadow of greed. So I'm excited to be talking about this one because for many years I have been focused on the mechanics of how ascension actually works. How does frequency change through a human body to become something that allows for a changing of reality? So I'm excited to talk about this one. There's also a variety of ways that we can experience this through our bodies. So this is a really pretty awesome gene key to be starting off 2022 with. So Bella, we just came out. I did the version on Tuesday for gene key 38, the shadow of struggle, and I think it's so interesting that the evolution of struggle is greed, as if once we've come into the experience of struggle, we've connected to this inner aggressiveness that is part of our human experience. There's this evolution of that particular conflict of depriving others of necessary resources while gathering all of them for ourselves.
Yeah, this is what we are seeing when we're going around the wheel. We see where are we and what is the next hexagram and how do they come together. So for me to do this journey that we have been doing for almost a year, you and I, and that Ash and I have been doing for long, really to see that what archetype is following the one that was before. And I feel I was almost going to run away and get the book, the 64 Ways book, because I loved when I reread it a few days ago, the way that Richard speaks about the city. And in my life cycle, and this is something we don't always, in the beginning stages of human design, you might not look at your life cycles because that's more something we do in astrology. But life cycles are when you have important periods, you could say, in your life. So one is your Saturn return, the first one when you're 30, and that's kind of when you are becoming more aware, because the first 30 years are often a lot of trial and error. And for me, between my Saturn return and my Uranus opposition, which is when I'm 44, I think, I have a life cycle where 54.2 is my life's work in that cycle. Is basically taking the chart the day that my Saturn returned to the place it was when I was born, and that creates a new chart. And when I read that city, I think I even had to highlight it in quote, like a quote, and send to Ashley, because I realized that that's the kind of fuel that is so important for me, and that this serpent path, it's not easy and it's not always fun, and it's really not something that is up in kind of the pink clouds of spirituality. It goes into the very visceral. It eats its own tail in a way until you can digest everything that's been there, until you need to digest your karma in a way in order to be able to ascend to something higher. So I feel the power absolutely of this gene key, and it's part of the cross of penetration. So it's here to be direct and penetrating, and it's part of the tribal circuitry too. So it is about survival, and it's an important survival, because it knows that if I ascend, then my whole tribe, the people I care about, the people I support, they are also going to ascend. So I'm also interested in seeing what we can uncover together, because with your questions, there's always like more that comes up than just what we can read in the gene keys or in the human design.
Well, I'm really glad that you were feeling inspired to begin speaking about the city itself, because the city of Ascension, it is this idea of the transformation and the evolution of human beings from a purely material being into potentially even a being of light. And this is part of what the discussion of any spiritually focused discussion, it at the very least hints about it. And what kind of comes to mind for me first off when I was reading about this particular city, as far as I know, it's the only city where Richard Rudd, in his description, basically puts out this big warning, like, hey, if this isn't for you, like, don't get stuck in the conditioning of wanting to pursue a city that isn't yours. And I don't think I've seen that anywhere else in any of the gene keys. And I think it's such an interesting point to make, especially when so much of the wisdom that we have access to in the world around how does an enlightenment occur. We looked at the 58 just recently, which is kind of like the model of enlightenment. But here we have this ascension path, and when reading that city, it's like, beware of what happens if this isn't for you. And I'm curious about what thoughts you have around that, Bella, and if there's a particular, like, while we're working with our physical bodies, and for anyone who's probably engaging in a study of the gene keys or human design, none of us are really embodying a city frequency at this moment in our focused experience. Doesn't mean that it isn't a part of us on some level or whatever, but like, we're all working with ourselves and our own experience of shadow frequencies, lower frequency relationships. How does this idea that is set forth in there, that basically says, like, hey, if your kundalini gets awakened by mistake, or you're not ready for it or whatever, like, this is bad news for you. So how do we relate with this, and can we sort of apply that to our hologenetic profile or our design? Should we be seeking our own evolutionary development through our own unique genetic sequencing, or leaving the other ones behind? Or is this more, is following this path of ascension something that can be beneficial for us?
There's so many possible routes to take from here. I mean, the first thing I was going to mention is that, yeah, in the 54, we have this place in the fourth line that is completely different when we look at the I Ching and the traditional way of seeing it and the way we look at it in human design. It's enlightenment and endarkenment. That's the fourth line of the 54. And there is this kind of crossroads, where either you go up or you go down. And without becoming too extreme, I think that this is what we can see in humanity. Even the way, and Richard Rudd speaks about attitude a lot. He says that the difference between the shadow and the gift is often the attitude that we actually can choose in to a big extent, to a large extent. So when we look at the world right now in humanity and the attitude that we are deciding to have, we can see an attitude that is kind of leading to darkenment and fear and feeling not sovereign, and an attitude that's leading to our own sovereignty and liberation. And for me, it's almost like it's already written that there is, in a way, this split, and some of us are going to choose the path of sovereignty, the path of liberation, the path of awakening. And in that path, those subtle energies that we're going to start to feel in this denser form, because we have this process of evolution, the process of involution, and we're meeting, and we are the meeting point. So I believe that when that is happening, there is no, for me to say that there is a danger with Kundalini, I feel like that is a misunderstanding, because we are here to be able to perceive more subtle energies in the dense, and that for me is a discovery, a continuous discovery. That is one of the most most rewarding is a weird word, but maybe with the 54, that's the word we want to use, because it is rewarding when you can start to have a superpower of the subtle in the dense. So that is one way of seeing it. And then there was something that you were saying. Yeah, for me, when it comes to Kundalini, I don't think that there is any mistake. If you're supposed to have a sudden Kundalini awakening and it feels like your brain is blowing up, I think that was part of what you were here to have. And I think that the fear of it's more dangerous, because we are all here to start to be able to feel it. And I listened to meditation tonight, last night when I couldn't sleep, and it was speaking about the 7 sisters. And I I knew that this is my path, this is my lineage, this is my family. It's the 7 sisters, in the Taurus constellation, the Pleiades. And that is that electricity, the truth of the solar feminine that is coming in. We've always seen the feminine as a reflection, the moon of the masculine. But right now, this is the membership that some of us that are here on the inside, this is the solar truth, the soul, SOUL, solar truths that we are finding as men and as women, where both the feminine is in its solar truth and the masculine is in its solar truth. And that's when we have the Hero's Gamas. Then that's when we have the Vesica Pisces, not in a reversal, but it's in its true expression. And for me, it takes both curiosity and courage to be able to see these things, because it's not so tangible. Like me speaking about the 7 sisters in the Taurus constellation and the Pleiades coming to Earth. But, and that's what, for me, this is something that not all of us are going to be able to see. And I'm not saying that it's a path for everybody, but if it is your path, you are going to resonate. And it's that easy. You don't have to think, is Ascension for me or not? Well, does it resonate? Do you remember? Is there a remembrance of something that your soul already knows? Well, then that's your path. Follow that then.
Yeah. There's so much that I want to respond to in there, but I think one of the most important concepts to kind of draw from there is to recognize that our conception of who and what we are, no matter whether we're using human design in the gene keys, or we're using an ancient Hindu or yogic chakra system to understand what we are as spiritual beings, or we're using something as maybe comparatively basic as a personality categorization like Myers-Briggs or something else. No matter what that conception is, the way that we frame ourselves to ourselves doesn't change what we actually are. And what we actually are is always clear through the factor of resonance, because energy cannot lie. If you resonate with something, it means there's energy present within you that is complementary, at the very least, to whatever it is that you're perceiving. And for that reason, this idea that we have to understand or mentally work out, well, what is the path of my evolution? Even though that's all we're doing through gene keys and human design, a tremendous amount of mental energy is being used to create a picture of how we experience ourselves and how we experience the world that we can relate with. This idea of resonance brings us into our sense of a feeling body, our sense of intuition, our sense of just our emotional connection to our experience. And within that, those resonances are going to drive us forward. And the way that we experience the world is going to assist us in that process, even if it looks like sometimes that assistance is coming in the form of difficult, painful, or unpleasant experiences in our lives. And I think really this is so interesting to me, because this shadow of greed directly discusses this potential for spiritual aspiration to slide into an egoic pursuit that is in essence greedy by nature, but comes out of us through this flowery spiritual language that allows us to appear to others and to ourselves as someone who is engaged in, a process of evolution that makes us feel higher on the hierarchy of our experience of humanity. So all of these potentials of people who say, well, I'm spiritual now because they do yoga, or they are vegan, or they fast, or they want to have a loving, they want to express themselves in a loving manner no matter how anybody else shows up. All of a sudden just saying, well, I'm spiritual, there's this huge pitfall of getting greedy about the very experience of yourself in this new identity as some spiritually evolving person. And that greed is about creating separation between that which enriches oneself and separating that enrichment from others. And I mean, it's, when we talk about greed, I mean, what's the first thing that comes to mind for most people is A Christmas Carol and Ebenezer Scrooge, and this sort of behavior of just absolute blunt level of that reactive greed, where a person is so obviously within that frequency of energy that it's unmistakable. And yet there is this subtle level to it that happens that, you know, people I think are becoming more and more clearly aware of as more changes occur within us as individuals and as societies, where you hear somebody who has something to offer to the world and something just doesn't smell quite right. I mean, the whole responses to the pandemic, to you know, some of these people who are driving the pinnacle of our economy, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, people are sniffing them out and going like, something isn't right here. Not that we necessarily know that what that is. A lot of people, I think, jump to conclusions based on what it is they're sniffing. So I'm curious, Bella, if you have like a, I don't know, some sort of reflection about how this shadow is kind of like, it's like permeating the society, and what can happen because of that as more and more people sort of, I guess, remember is a good word to use based on the comments that you were making earlier about Ascension, remembering the difference, that the potential that this energy has for the collective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to do something a little bit different today in the charts that I'm going to show, but the way that I usually speak about the 54, the shadow of greed, and then the programming partner, the 53, which is the shadow of immaturity, is that it feels like it is this attachment to power structures that have worked. But as we are always evolving and society is always evolving, to be attached to that, the old way of, like, maybe if I am in the playground with other kids and I take something and I run, then it's going to be mine, you know, like maybe that worked in the past, but maybe that's not going to work anymore. But it is that immature way of thinking, okay, if this worked before, it's going to work now. And that's how I see how that immaturity and greed work together. And the more we, you know, hopefully ascend, the less immaturity and selfishness is going to be a way that works. And I think that there can also actually be kind of a misunderstanding of like sovereignty and centeredness as an individual and selfishness. And I think it is very different. And when you are self-centered or sovereign from a place of high frequency, that is not going to have any bad consequences for anybody else. It's just like that. Well, self-serving is whole-serving, but the kind of greed and immaturity that we see in the shadow of the 54 and the shadow of the 53 is always taking from somewhere to you, so that there is an imbalance. So that's the difference. And I think we're even starting to learn, because of all the conditioning we have had of what it is to be a good citizen or what it is to be a good family member. You know, we are starting to realize what is it to be centered in me, and how that has a good impact on the whole. But what I wanted to do is a little bit different. So I'm going to share this, and this. So where we are when we are speaking about Capricorn, where we have the 54 and then the 53, the programming partner, is Cancer. So we are right now, the sun is on this axis that is cardinal earth and cardinal water, and you can see that it is Capricorn is here in the transpersonal. It's society, it's the outer, it's the 10th sign. So it's what we see out there, it's the structures of society. And part of what we were saying, you know, we think that we can get inner security, emotional security, by maybe believing in those outer structures, but that's something immature to think that what's worked always is going to continue to work. And then I think this one is interesting too, because here we see there are even more keywords, and this is evolution astrology that I'm using. So where we are with the sun and the earth now is on this axis of security. And I think that there is something with the 54 that feels like false security. Like even when you say, oh, be careful, don't go into Kundalini awakening because it might not be from you. Like this feeling of it's not safe. And I feel like for me, it is safe, you know, and it is the feminine, you know, here we have the cardinal earth, the cardinal water, and it's the feminine is all about feeling in the form. And that's the electricity of the Pleiades, that's the electricity of the bodies. For me, I believe that what was secure before, or was safe and secure before, is changing. And the other thing I just want to point out is that the nodes were in Sagittarius and Gemini in 2021, and now they are moving in to the axis of of Scorpio and Taurus, and this is the axis of survival. This is there is something important too, that things are going to be accentuated in the 18th months, 2022, 2023, where we're going to have to look at those, I mean, I think more basic things, and where maybe there is more of this somehow enlightenment and darkment theme. And, you know, can you choose sides, or are you predestined, or, you know, like, I think there are going to be many of those. And maybe the Taurus that says, well, you just have to think kind of what do you need, how can you set it up, how can you have a foundation, how can you buy things in the supermarket, if then there is nothing, how can you grow your own things? And then Scorpio is kind of saying, I'm ready to die and like let go of everything and surrender, you know, like there are interesting things there, like as the inner security is going to be shaken and the outer security is going to be shaken, how is that impacting our survival? And are we going to the more Taurus kind of practical, how can we still live, how can we still have pleasure? Or are we kind of allowing this kind of tower card to just like rock our world and be like, I lost everything, but I found myself, whatever, you know, that transformation of Scorpio is. So for me, these are interesting times now in the beginning of the 2020s, and, you know, this decade is going to be interesting, is what I feel. And I think that the 53 and the 54 are both showing what happens when we start to shake those things that we thought were the structures that we could hang on to forever and that will work forever, and actually they won't.
Yeah, so, you know, that brings me to a comment that you made earlier, and it's about how I can't quite remember exactly what it was that you said, but the presence of greed is simply aspiration without trust. And so when you're talking about safety and this kind of evolutionary shift that is happening between the Taurus and the Scorpio, our survival is, where does trust really arise from? Trust is this experience that one's own survival is safe when the control of another is present. So if someone who has the power to determine whether or not you survive is with you, trust is only present if one's own survival is assured in that situation. So I think bringing up this aspect of survival is so incredibly important, because it's one of those incredibly basic fears that you really can't avoid as a human being. Even for those who may have done all sorts of work and you know, lots of processing of emotional negativity or anything, you may get to a point where you say like, yeah, I'm not afraid of dying anymore. but until you've had a direct experience of death, whether that's a near-death experience or something akin to going through a spiritual process like in the mysteries used to do, or you've had some expansion of your awareness of self, that you have direct experience of death, there's no way that you can fully remove that fear. And as things continue to change, I think it's important to just notice that where does everything come from on this lower spectrum of human experience? It's on some level fear. And one of the things that I had mentioned while talking about the 38 was how some of that creative process of generating our reality that we often ascribe to the outer environment is actually something that comes from within. Safety doesn't happen because of the circumstances that surround us. Safety happens because of the frequency that we bring to a situation. Now, that doesn't necessarily, that may not always have the power to, one's individual safety may not have the power to transmute an entire environment of risk or of potential danger. Danger is always very real, but it's that underlying fear that is the illusion. There isn't a way that the world as it is can be completely safe. The only way is to generate that frequency within ourselves that isn't based upon fear. And I feel like, we haven't talked about this today, but in this discussion about the shadow of greed and aspiration is this concept of prosperity. And how do we engage in the world in such a way that we are truly supporting the prosperity of others by engaging with our own? And I feel like that's such an important process. Are we making this world a safer place for others, or are we being greedy with our safety? The mass shootings that continue to plague our societies across the world are really, the whole debate about how guns function in society and all of that stuff, the right to bear arms in the United States that is held so dear by so many people, it's really based on greed because of the distrust of others. So, there's just so much in there, and Bella, I'd love to hear a little bit about your understanding of prosperity in this context, and how could prosperity actually serve in a way of eradicating fear, or in a way of creating trust, or creating an environment that people can bring trust to?
Yeah, I feel like there is an expansion of what the tribe was that happens with globalizations. There are all these things with globalization that we can see, maybe an agenda that is negativism and maybe that has to do with control and all that. But globalization in its truth sense, for me, is that the tribe becomes humanity. So when we look at the tribal gates, as for example, the 54, it cares about the people that sits around the table, the people that sleep in the same bed, or that they hug, or that they handshake with, and that they share their food with. That's really the tribal. It's the people that I know, the people that I support, the people that support me, the people that have shared principles with me. And it can be very kind of, with those principles, it can be a bit particular. And that's why we have different religions. That's why we have different cultures. And I think that's where we were, and that was our survival. And we didn't have the means of knowing what happens on the other side of the globe. So that was okay. We had that little world that was our world, and that's what we supported. And with the globalization and the technology, what's happening is that we can absolutely know. It's just like milliseconds of delay, and I know what's happening in Colorado, or even further away in the world. And that for me is that we are expanding the range of what is our tribe, and the principles, instead of being super detailed, for me the principles are becoming love and truth and trust and faith of humanity. So what I can see is that when we can make what we consider as the tribe, when that becomes humanity, when that becomes more collective, because we now are all connected. I can see when we work with the culture, every time in the Pearl sequence, connecting it to prosperity, I always see this grid of all of us. And of course, some of the bonds or some of the links between, if we're all like little lighthouses, some links are going to be stronger because there is family, but at the same time, I can see every single human being that little antenna between the earth and the sky, and that there is something bigger than just the mind's or the ego's survival in this world and the me. So for me, that's when prosperity is coming in, when we can make the tribe include humanity. And from weird decisions of like, oh, you can marry one woman or you can marry 5 women, and if you marry only one, then you're bad, or if you marry 5, then you can't be in this country. Like, when we can get away from that kind of principles into the principles of the heart, that's when I see that prosperity, that we can have, like, that's when the new world is created. And I don't think that all of us are willing or able to maybe stretch that far, but that's what I see as the pathway to then a prosperity, where it's not I take from here and give there and then there's an imbalance, but it's this how we all are creating more for all of us.
I love that. I love that idea of connecting prosperity to a heart-centered perspective, and recognizing that the flow of resources occurs through our own individual possibility of allowing the flow of energy through us. And I think this particular gene key speaks so much to that concept, and that when we are primarily focused in what might be termed an egoic way about relating to the hierarchy of society and of aspiring to get higher within that hierarchy so that we can experience abundance, the abundance of wealth, or the abundance of opportunity, or the abundance of time through some way of producing wealth in our lives. And having that singular individual focus transferred into a much wider spectrum, from an open heart that is accepting of all and allows that flow of energy to be spread amongst many. I think that conversation about abundance and prosperity is such an important one to continue having, to continue contemplating in terms of the overall evolution of humanity, because no matter what we do, no matter what we talk about or contemplate on a spiritual level, we're all in physical bodies here. And those genetic drives for survival are not going to go away. and so even if we aspire to have more, maybe an evolved way of looking at things, we're still going to be driven by these sort of lower vibrating frequencies until we can fully manifest as a collective some potential that is higher. And I think that, that sort of heart-centered perspective is where humanity is going, where it's focused.
Yeah, I have one more thing that I wanted to go into before we go into our little container. And it's going back to what you spoke about in the beginning, and that kind of disclaimer that Richard puts on the 54th city. And, for me, maybe because of all that Scorpio in my chart, and part of the Capricorn too, the Capricorn South Node, I believe it's not for the faint-hearted, because there are no shortcuts. And I want to actually even quote that thing I sent to Ashley. I found it, because that's the 54. It has to do the work. And sometimes with people that have a lot of Sagittarius, for example, and they're like, oh, but you can just believe it and it happens, or you can just like do this and this and this, and then that contract from your lineage about suffering, then it's not there anymore. You just have to do this and this and this. And I'm like, no, yeah, it's like a purification. It's an alchemizing in the body. Like, I have those ways of how I have always understood it and seen it and experienced it, and I don't feel like there are any shortcuts. And for me, when the 54th city speaks, I'm like, I feel so confirmed in how I see the process of ascension. So I just want to bring up, like, it's a little short passage that I feel is helpful. So the process of ascension concerns the highest levels of refinement. Each step along the way is so important. We can't skip a single step. Every difficult experience that life brings us must be passed through and transformed inside of us, in our heart. If everything in your life is smooth except one person who always causes problem for you, you can't skip past that person. You have to confront the issue, transform it, and only then can you move on. Nothing can be sidestepped. There are no shortcuts. This is the language of the 54th city. As we get more refined and purified, we become more intensely spiritual.
Beautiful.
For me, that's just powerful. Like, it makes me smile, because that's how and also I realize that maybe not everybody experiences like that, but that is I guess that is my loyalty or connection to the 54th city. It's the way that I'm experiencing that path towards the city, that ascension towards the city. And then we know there are 64 and maybe 6,054, who knows, different expressions of the higher frequencies. But this is my experience with it, and I love how it says that. And I understand it's not for everybody to just really say yes and have faith that that's the process.
Yeah, beautiful. And just to add the perhaps a potential of the other side of that there are no shortcuts, there are no, you can't skip any steps. I'm imagining, from each of these cities, so often the idea of self is sacrificed, or is surrendered rather, to recognize the other as self, so that even in achieving acidic frequency, if you ascend truly, then the lowest frequency within humanity will be your own. That will be your focus of your individuality. Any frequency that surrounds you that is still in a low or imprisoned state, perhaps you have the benefit of it, experiencing the joy and bliss of enlightenment or liberation, but the suffering of others will become your primary focus, because you see that lower frequency as your own. So, I mean, it's really, I think that was a really fantastic aspect of this gene key to bring up, though. I really love that passage. That's in the 64 ways, is it? Yeah. Awesome. Well, so for those of you watching on Facebook, now is the time for us to go with our members of Lunar Alchemy to prepare for a quantum energetic transmission. And what we do each week is to focus our attention onto the qualities of the gene key, and specifically generally of the shadow frequency, which is being highlighted and illuminated by the movements of the moon. We then engage with a high frequency energy transmission that assists our bodies in the integration of lower vibrational frequency that is either present in our personalities, in our families, in our communities, in our lineage, in our experience in some way, so that we can continue our path of evolution. And if you choose to see it that way, even ascension. So for watching on Facebook, to learn more about how that all works, you can click on the link that I posted in the comments. And we would love to have you join us, as this container focuses or functions based on energetic resonance. And the more people that resonate with this work, the greater the impact of that resonance will have on each individual in the group, as well as on the collective that we're all a part of. So, again, happy 2022 to each of you. We will see you on a future discussion.